You know, I have one passion that many would consider strange, or even unhealthy. I have always been drawn to places with history, but not to those that sparkle on tourist postcards, but to those that keep in their walls the echoes of something gloomy, forgotten, uncomfortable. I am not a ghost hunter in the classical sense. In any case, I have always considered myself an inveterate skeptic, a person who believes only in what can be touched, measured, explained by logic. My job, I'm a freelancer, writing articles, sometimes books, and digging through archives allowed me to satisfy this curiosity, turning it into something meaningful. I've traveled around a lot of abandoned farmsteads, old factories, and forgotten settlements where life once boomed, and then something went wrong. In most cases, the curses and ghosts hid banal things, dilapidated structures, the play of light and shadow, the creaks of old wood, and the wild imagination of rare visitors, fueled by local tales. Sometimes, of course, there were traces of very real tragedies, old newspaper clippings about accidents, forgotten diaries describing family dramas, but nothing that went beyond the human, too human. I remember spending a week in an old mining town that was almost completely abandoned after the mine closed. Legend said that the spirits of the dead miners roamed there at night. I spent the night in one of the empty houses, wandering through the tunnels with a lantern, and all I heard was the howling of the wind in the chimneys and the rustle of rats. I found a couple of interesting artifacts and wrote a good article about the social drama hidden behind mining folklore. This reinforced my skepticism. I've learned to separate the wheat from the chaff, the facts from the fiction. But somewhere in the depths of my soul, I admit, there has always been a spark, not exactly of hope, but rather of excitement. What if one day I stumble upon something that really makes me doubt? Not in Ghosts with Sheets, no. The point is that human cruelty or desperation has its limits. I heard about the Myrtles Plantation, or, as it was more often called in those parts, simply Old Myrtles, by chance, during one of my trips to the south. I was sitting in a dusty bar on the outskirts of some godforsaken town, trying to talk to a local old-timer about the legends of their neighborhood. The old man, incredulous at first, after the third shot of something scaldingly strong, lowered his voice and mumbled, "If you need real horror, son, it's not here for you. You need to go to Myrtles. But I don't recommend it. From there, not everyone returns the way they were. If they come back at all." He told me a lot of things back then, about shadows in windows, about whispers in empty rooms, about the strange disappearances of people over the decades. Most of it sounded like a typical set of horror stories for tourists, but something in his tone, in his frightened eyes, hooked me. He spoke not as a storyteller who wanted to make an impression, but as a man who was afraid of what he was talking about. Then I started digging. There was surprisingly little information about Myrtles in official sources, as if someone had been diligently cleaning up the archives. But the rumors were thick and sticky like molasses. They talked about the cruel planter who once owned this place, about slaves tortured to death, about some kind of bloody family drama that played out after the abolition of slavery. But most importantly, all the stories, even the oldest ones, agreed on one thing: Myrtles is not just a place with a bad reputation. This is a place that is actively hostile to the living. Of course, I reacted to this with a fair amount of skepticism. A hostile place? What nonsense. But professional curiosity could not be appeased. Unmasking the Myrtles Plantation, that phrase was spinning in my head. I wanted to get to the bottom of the truth, whatever it was. If it's just an old house with lots of legends, I'll write about it. If there are traces of real crimes, unsolved mysteries, so much the better for my work. The preparation took several weeks. I collected the equipment, a good camera with night vision, a voice recorder, powerful flashlights, a first aid kit. You never know, the place is old, you can catch a nail, a supply of food and water for several days. I wasn't going to be a hero or get into trouble. My plan was simple: to come, look around, if possible, get permission for access, although I doubted that it existed and that someone would give it, and if not, well, then I would have to act at my own risk, as it had happened before. I warned a couple of friends about where I was going and when I planned to return, and left them copies of maps of the area, which is standard procedure for such trips. The road to Myrtles was an adventure in itself. At first, a wide highway, then increasingly narrow and broken country roads, until finally the navigator gave up, showing that only the direction was further away. For the last few miles, I've been driving along a barely noticeable track overgrown with tall grass that scraped against the underside of the car. There was no one around, just a dense, moist forest that closed over the road like a dark tunnel. The sun barely penetrated through the dense foliage, and even during the day there was some kind of shaky twilight. The air was heavy, saturated with the smells of rotten foliage, damp earth, and something else, subtly disturbing, sweetly putrid, or something. The closer I got to the intended location, the stronger this feeling became. Not fear, no, but rather, tension. It was as if the space itself was thickening, pressing down. I put it down to fatigue and the specifics of the place. Abandoned plantations in the South have always had a special atmosphere. But this atmosphere was just too dense. When around the next bend, through the tangled branches of old, weeping willows, the vague outlines of a large, dark house appeared, I felt a chill run down my spine, despite the stifling heat. Myrtles Plantation. I was there. And the first thing that caught my eye was not the house itself, but the surrounding land. She looked sick. The grass was withered and unnaturally colored, and the trees were twisted as if in death throes. And silence. Not the peaceful silence of nature, but the dead, oppressive silence that made my ears ache. I turned off the engine, and the silence fell on me with all its weight. It was just the beginning, I knew it. And I was ready for anything. Or at least that's what it seemed to me. I got out of the car, and my legs felt a little weak, either from the long drive or from the sudden weight of this place. The air was thick as jelly, and every breath was difficult. The same sweet putrid smell that I had noticed on the entrance was stronger and more intrusive here. It tickled my nostrils, causing an unpleasant itch somewhere in the back of my throat. I looked around. The house, 2 stories high, once probably majestic, with columns on the façade, was now a sad sight. The paint had peeled off, exposing the dark, cracked wood. The windows, many without glass, gaped with black holes, like empty eye sockets of a skull. The veranda that encircled the ground floor had sagged in several places, and the boards on it looked treacherously rotten. Wild bushes were rampant around the house, and some thorny vines were twining around the columns, reaching the roof. It was not just desolation, it was like the slow but sure absorption of traces of human presence by nature, and this nature itself looked unhealthy, somehow aggressive. I took out of the trunk a backpack with the most necessary things, a flashlight, a camera, a canteen with water. I decided not to take heavy equipment yet. First I just had to look around and assess the situation. After locking the car, I slowly moved towards the house. Dry twigs and something else that looked like small bones were crunching underfoot. Bird bones, most likely, but in this place every little thing took on an ominous hue. The silence was so absolute that I could hear my own breathing and the pounding of my heart, which for some reason increased with every step towards this gloomy building. I tried to breathe evenly, convincing myself that it was just an old, abandoned house, like the ones I'd seen dozens of. But something was wrong. Some kind of unconscious sense of danger, as if I was being watched. I turned sharply several times, peering into the dense undergrowth, into the dark gaps of the windows, but I saw no one and nothing. There was only a flutter of leaves from a barely noticeable breeze, which, however, did not bring any coolness. When I reached the veranda, I stopped. The steps leading up to it had almost completely crumbled. I stepped on one of them, and it broke with a soft crack. I had to find a way around. From the side, where the veranda was slightly lower, I pulled myself up and was able to climb onto it. The boards creaked and buckled menacingly underfoot. Up close, the house looked even more depressing. Cobwebs hung everywhere in thick, dusty festoons. There was some trash in the corners, old bottles, newspaper scraps, but nothing that would indicate a recent human presence. Or, on the contrary, it pointed, but in such a way that it became uncomfortable. For example, one of the bottles was smashed with such ferocity that the fragments bit into the wooden floor like teeth. The main entrance door, massive and made of dark wood, was tightly closed. I pushed it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked from the inside? Or is it just jammed by time and dampness? There was a tall window nearby, one of the few where the cloudy, fly-speckled glass was still preserved. I looked inside. The semi-darkness, the dust, the outlines of some furniture covered with decayed covers. Nothing special. But here's the strange thing. On the windowsill from the inside there was an object that did not fit in with the overall picture of desolation. A small, childish toy. A faded, battered stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. He was lying with his face to the glass, and his single button eye seemed to be looking right at me. Where did he come from? Who left it? And why exactly is that? It was disturbing. It's not scary, no, it's just wrong. I decided to go around the perimeter of the house, look for another entrance. There was another door on the back, smaller, leading, apparently, to the kitchen or to the utility rooms. It was ajar. The dark doorway beckoned and repelled at the same time. I took out a flashlight, although the sun hadn't set yet, but it was probably dark under the shade of the trees and inside the house. He flipped a switch and a ray of light tore out a piece of a shabby wall from the semi-darkness. The smell inside was even worse, along with the rot and dampness. There was a musty, heavy smell that made my throat itch. I took a step inside. The silence here was different, more dense, viscous. Every step I took echoed loudly, despite the fact that the floor was littered with some junk. Kitchen utensils, rusty and bent, were scattered among the broken dishes. On the table are the remains of something that was once food, now turned into a black, petrified mass covered with mold. But in the midst of this chaos, I noticed something else. There were fresh scratches on the wall next to the doorway. Deep, parallel lines, as if someone or something had clawed the wood with force. Not animal tracks, the tracks were too smooth, too meaningful. I ran my finger along one of the furrows. The wood under the nail was fresh. These scratches have appeared here recently. I slowly moved deeper into the house, trying to tread as quietly as possible, although it was almost impossible. The floor creaked with every step, as if complaining about my intrusion. I walked through what used to be a dining room, a large, empty table in the middle, overturned chairs. The dust was so thick that it seemed like no human had set foot in decades. But this feeling is deceptive. In the corner, on the floor, I saw footprints. Fuzzy, blurred, but definitely human. And they were fresh, on top of a layer of dust. Someone was here before me, and quite recently. Someone who also walked through these rooms. And for some reason, I didn't want to meet him at all. I went up the wide, once probably beautiful staircase to the second floor. The stairs creaked even louder underfoot, each one threatening to collapse. There were bedrooms upstairs. The doors to most of them were open, revealing the same desolation as below. Old beds with rotted mattresses, broken cupboards, mirrors reflecting only the murky darkness. But in one of the rooms, the largest, probably the master bedroom, I came across something that made me freeze. In the middle of the room, on the floor, there was a clearly outlined chalk outline. A human silhouette. Like the ones the cops draw at the crime scene. The chalk was bright and fresh. It wasn't done decades ago. This was done quite recently. There were several cigarette butts and an empty pack of some cheap brand cigarettes lying next to the outline. My heart started pounding. This is no longer just an abandoned house with legends. Something specific was happening here. And very, very bad, cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The chalk outline. Fresh. This was already going beyond the gloomy atmosphere and old legends. It looked like a stage play, or worse, like traces of a real, recent crime. Who could have done this? Local teenagers who decided to tickle their nerves? But the cigarette butts and the general atmosphere spoke of something more serious. Besides, who would come to such a remote place for a joke? I carefully walked around the contour, trying not to touch anything, although what was the point if someone had already inherited here? My gaze fell on the fireplace located in the opposite wall. It was huge, black with soot. And there was something about him. I came closer and shone the flashlight. Inside, among the ashes and charred logs, lay crumpled, stained with something dark, clothes? I found a piece of wood nearby and stirred the contents of the fireplace with it. Yes, it was clothes. A jacket, jeans, something else, badly burned and stuck together. And from this came the same faint but distinct sweet nauseating smell that I had felt from outside, only here it was mixed with burning. The smell of burnt flesh. I began to feel queasy. I stepped back from the fireplace, trying to catch my breath. It didn't feel like a game anymore. It was too real. I had to get out of here. Immediately. Call the police. But what am I going to tell them? What did you find in an abandoned house with a chalk outline and burnt clothes? They'll think I'm crazy, or I've done something myself. I needed proof. Photo. I took out my camera, trying not to let my hands shake, and started filming. Contour. Fireplace. Clothes in the fireplace. Footprints on the floor. Scratches in the kitchen. Every detail. When I finished with the bedroom, I felt like I couldn't stay here anymore. This place was crushing, draining away strength. I went downstairs, trying not to make any noise, even though my heart was pounding so hard that it seemed to be audible throughout the house. Passing by that room with a stuffed rabbit on the windowsill, I looked in the window again. The hare was still sitting there, his single eye seemed to be watching me. And then I noticed something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. On the dusty windowsill, next to the stuffed rabbit, which was still staring blankly at me with its single button eye, there was a small, neatly folded piece of paper. White and clean, it contrasted sharply with the surrounding dirt and dust. He definitely wasn't there when I looked at this room through the window on my way upstairs before going up to the second floor. I was absolutely sure of it. Someone put it there while I was upstairs, while I was photographing that creepy chalk outline and the burnt rags in the fireplace. Someone was in the house. Or still was. And that someone knew I was here. Panic, cold and sticky, began to rise from within, hampering his movements. The brain screamed, "Run! Get out of here right now," but his feet seemed rooted to the floor. The piece of paper, it was lying there like a bait. Or as a message. What's in it? A threat? A warning? Or maybe a clue to what was going on here? My journalistic curiosity, my obsession with exposure, struggled with the instinct of self-preservation. If I leave now, I'll never know. But if I stay... I slowly backed away from the window, trying not to make a sound. I had to get into that room. The door to it most likely opened into the main hall, through which I passed. I held my breath, listening. The house was silent. The same oppressive, unnatural silence. But now she seemed ominous, full of hidden menace. Every creak of the floorboard under my foot echoed in my ears like a gunshot. I went back to the lobby. The door to the room with the hair was massive, made of dark wood, like the entrance. I carefully took hold of the handle. Cold metal. He turned around. It's locked. Damn. Of course it's locked. Why would it be open? I looked out the window again. Break the glass? It's too noisy. If someone's in the house, they'll know where I am right away. And if not, anyway, it will attract unnecessary attention if someone is nearby. Although it's so close, there's not a soul for miles around. Except for those who might already be inside. I walked around the house from the outside again, carefully examining the windows of that room. They were tall, antique, with fine bindings. One of them, the most extreme, looked a little less durable. The frame at the bottom was rotten. Maybe we can open it? I took a small multi-tool with a flat-head screwdriver out of my backpack. My heart was pounding in my throat. I felt like an idiot. I came here to investigate old legends, but I got involved in some kind of devilry that is happening right now. I went to the selected window and listened again. Silence. Only the rustle of leaves on those unhealthy trees surrounding the house. I carefully inserted the screwdriver between the frame and the sash, trying to find the latch. The old tree was yielding, crumbling. After several minutes of agonizing attempts, accompanied by a quiet creaking and cracking, I managed to move the rusty latch. The door creaked inwards a couple of inches. It's enough to put your hand in and open it completely. I looked inside. The room was in semi-darkness, and dust hung in the air like a column, illuminated by the slanting rays of the setting sun filtering through the dirty glass. A rabbit on the windowsill. And a piece of paper next to it. I quickly, but trying not to make any noise, got inside. The smell here was different from the rest of the house. Less rot, but more of some kind of old, ingrained dust and a subtle scent of something sweet, floral? Strange. I went to the windowsill. His hands were shaking slightly. He took the paper. It was folded in four. I unwrapped it. The paper was ordinary, from a notebook. Only a few words were written on it in pencil, in an uneven, almost childish handwriting. No names, no dates. Just a short sentence. Its contents sent a chill down my spine again. It said, "He sees you. Run while you can." He sees you. Who is he? The one who left the chalk outline? The one who burned the clothes in the fireplace? Or someone else? And why the child's handwriting? Was it written by a child? Or was someone trying to imitate him? Run while you can. Is this a warning or a mockery? I swallowed hard. This is definitely not a game anymore. Whoever wrote this knew I was here, and they wanted me to leave. Or he wanted me to think that's what he wanted. I quickly looked around the room. Apart from the old furniture, covered with covers, and this rabbit, there is nothing remarkable. No sign of whoever left the note. But the feeling of someone else's presence became almost unbearable. I felt like a mouse in a mousetrap. I took a picture of the note, then put it in my pocket. I had to get out. Right now. The warning, whatever it was, sounded too convincing. I climbed out through the same window, carefully closing the sash. My heart was pounding. I was no longer thinking about exposure or articles. All I could think about was how to get to my car as soon as possible and get as far away from this damn place as possible. I almost ran to my car, constantly looking around, expecting to see someone among the trees or in the dark windows of the house. But there was still only silence and this ominous desolation. The key was shaking in my hand as I inserted it into the ignition. The engine started on the first try, thank God. I spun the car around and hit the gas as hard as I could. The wheels squealed on the loose ground. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't want to see the Myrtles house receding behind me. I just wanted him to disappear. After driving a couple of miles, when the adrenaline subsided a little, I calmed down a little. Maybe I was so scared for nothing? Maybe this is someone's really mean joke? Teenagers, local scumbags? But the chalk outline, the burnt clothes, that sickening smell, and the note. There are too many things for a simple joke. And it's too professional if it's staged. I drove along, not understanding the road, until I came to a more or less decent country lane. Only then did I stop by the side of the road to catch my breath. His hands were still shaking. I took out the note. He sees you. Run while you can. What if it's not just a warning? What if he really saw me? And what if he didn't want me to leave just like that? And then I noticed it. In the back seat of my car. When I got behind the wheel, I was so worked up that I didn't pay attention. Now that the first shock has passed, I have seen. He was lying there. The same stuffed rabbit with one ear. He was leaning against the back of the seat, and his single button eye was staring straight at me in the rearview mirror. My blood froze in my veins. Literally. I felt an icy chill freeze my limbs, and my heart, which had just been about to jump out of my chest in panic, suddenly froze, missing a beat, and then began to beat slowly, heavily, as if pushing through congealed blood. The car was locked. I remembered exactly how I clicked the lock before moving towards the house. I always do this, it's a reflex. How? How the hell did he get there? He couldn't have materialized out of thin air. It meant only one thing, someone had opened my car. While I was up there, in that room with the chalk outline. Or while I was foolishly standing on the side of the road a few miles away, trying to catch my breath and collect my thoughts. But when? I would have heard. I would have seen it. Or was I so engrossed in my fear that I didn't notice anything? I spun around, frantically peering into the dim interior. No one. Empty. Just that damn rabbit. It wasn't just lying there like a forgotten thing. No. He was planted. Carefully, almost with some kind of perverted care, he leans against the back, so that his only black button eye stares ahead, straight into the mirror, straight at me. It wasn't just a warning. It was a statement. The "he sees you" note was childish in comparison. This hair was screaming, I can get to you. I can get into your most private space. You're not safe anywhere. With a trembling hand, I grabbed it. The fabric, old and faded, felt strangely, not dusty. She bore no traces of years of living in an abandoned, rotting house. She was clean. It was as if she had just been held in her arms. Maybe in the very hands that wrote the words on that piece of paper in a child's handwriting? The thought of it made me feel sick again. With a fury born of desperation, I opened the door and threw the hair out onto the road. He hit the gravel with a thud and remained there, a small dark lump in the gathering dusk. But it didn't change anything. The image of this toy, its single glass eye, stuck into my brain like a red-hot needle. Run while you can. I was running. But it was useless. He didn't just see. He acted. He was here, next to me, invisible but omnipotent in this little world of horror that I had so carelessly opened. My car, my last refuge, my only way to escape, has been desecrated. He's been here. So he knew. He knew who I was. He knew what I was driving. I started the engine again, my fingers wouldn't work, and the key screeched into the lock. Where to now? To the police? What am I going to tell them? That I'm haunted by a stuffed rabbit and notes with a child's handwriting? That in an abandoned house at the edge of the world I found a chalk outline and burnt things that smelled of death? At best, I'll be laughed at. At worst, they'll think I'm involved in all this, or I'm just crazy. No, the police are not an option. At least. Not right now. I pressed the accelerator pedal to the floor, not understanding the road. The car shot forward, leaving the poor hair behind, but I knew I hadn't left anything behind. I took this horror with me. I broke out of Myrtles' walls, but Myrtles, or whatever lived in her shadow, wouldn't let me go. Whoever was pulling the strings in this damn place now knew everything about me. My face, my car. And he, or they, could play. Cruelly. Sophisticated. And they seemed to enjoy playing with their food. It was still a hell of a long way to the nearest settlement. The forest around them was getting thicker and darker. The sun finally disappeared below the horizon, and a heavy, viscous night descended on the earth. The headlights picked out only a narrow, winding ribbon of road from the darkness. Every rustle in the forest, every crack of a branch under the wheels made me shudder as if from an electric shock. I kept looking in the rearview mirror, paranoidally expecting to see the lights of a pursuing car there, or maybe that rabbit again, somehow inexplicably returning to its place in the back seat. Suddenly, my phone, thrown on the passenger seat, vibrated and let out a short trill of an incoming message. I almost flew off the road. My heart sank into my throat. An unfamiliar number. Who could write to me? I didn't tell anyone the exact details of my route, except for the most general phrases to my friends. With trembling fingers, without taking my eyes off the road, I felt for the phone. There was one short message on the screen. 3 words. The game has just begun. And then the phone rang. The same unfamiliar number. I didn't want to answer. I knew I shouldn't. But the hand reached out on its own and pressed the call button. Silence. A second, 2, 3, an eternity. And then, I heard him. A child's soft, barely audible laughter. Not cheerful, not joyful. And icy, empty, like the eye sockets of that house, like the gaze of that stuffed rabbit. The laughter stopped as abruptly as it had begun. And then, almost without a pause, there was a whisper. The voice was distorted, passed through some kind of filter or program, but it was based on something familiar, something that made my hair stand on end. It wasn't a child. It was an adult, expertly imitating a child's intonation, but there was such an incredible, inhuman cruelty in it that I almost threw up right in the car. And this voice said, drawing out the words, savoring every sound, do you, like, hiding? I dropped the phone. He fell to the mat with a thud. My breath caught in my throat. I understood. It wasn't just the pursuit of a lone maniac. It was some kind of monstrous, elaborate game. Myrtles Plantation was just a playground, a trap. And I was a new toy. They knew who I was. They knew I was coming. They were waiting. The note, the rabbit, and that call were all moves in their game. And now they were enjoying my panic. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty, as far as I could see in the dim moonlight filtering through the clouds. But I knew that wasn't the case. They were out there somewhere. Or somewhere here. They will always be one step ahead. Unmasking the Myrtles Plantation. What a bitter, monstrous irony. I didn't expose anything. I was the one who was exposed. I was exposed to the light, open like a tin can. And now the game has really started. I pushed the gas pedal all the way down, but I felt it was useless. You can't get away from them. My scream stuck in my throat when I saw him in the headlights, just a few dozen meters ahead, blocking the narrow road. Not a human being. Not a beast. And my car. An exact replica of my car, standing across the road, with the lights off, a dark, sinister silhouette. And next to her, there was a figure standing next to her. Tall, motionless. She slowly raised her hand, and something flashed in the light of my headlights. It was the end. I realized this with terrifying clarity. I came here to look for history, and I found my death. And my last thought wasn't about saving myself, but that they wouldn't even let me find out what was really going on that damn plantation.